First, we're going to start with Tuesday's Colorado caucuses. Colorado's Republicans and Democrats both caucusing, but the outcomes will have greatly different impacts on the upcoming elections.
And joining us to talk about those differences are Steve House, chair of the Colorado Republican Party, and Rick Palacio, the chair of the Democratic Party.
All right, and we are going to start with you, Mr. House, because things are a little bit different for Republicans coming up on Tuesday. So explain the thinking behind that.
Well, they're not really all that different than they were 4 years ago, with the exception of we're not taking a straw poll like we did 4 years ago because the rules have changed on what a straw poll is. When a straw poll becomes a binding event, it's really an election, not a straw poll, and we're not prepared to do a straw poll this year.
But why not?
Because we're not prepared to do an election. So I've got a couple of major concerns with it. If you have 650 sites, 1,000 sites in the state, and you're trying to run an election where you're going to award delegates to a presidential candidate that might, in fact, be the tipping point for that candidate in this election, you need to have security, you need to have credentialing, you need to have a process that actually works in a way that has integrity. We were very, very concerned about doing a poll where you have ballots that are different across all these sites. Who's counting them? How are they being tallied? What if you had to have a recount because it was close enough that a delegate was in play one way or the other? That didn't make sense to us as a party. We also know that by having unbound delegates, and we may not have unbound delegates, all of our delegates may self-bind themselves, that by having some unbound delegates going to a convention that may go to more than one ballot, it gave Colorado a chance to play a much bigger role.
Now, I know it'll be exciting when you don't know what could happen at the convention, but Colorado is kind of an outlier right now when your delegates, you're not being courted by any of the candidates right now. Why is that a benefit to be able to be freewheeling at the convention?
We are actually being courted more than people realize, because if our delegates choose to bind themselves, because we get forms that they have to fill out that says, do I support a specific candidate or not? I get those forms in on a daily basis. Many of them have a name on them already, which means if those delegates get elected between now and April 9th, they will actually belong to that candidate. So at the end of the day on April 9th, some of our delegates will be bound to candidates, and we'll announce that.
But won't you be missing out Tuesday night when the rest of the country is talking about Super Tuesday and Colorado's not part of that conversation?
Because we're not doing a poll, I suspect there'll be plenty of polls going on that night. Yeah, would I like to have an election that night as opposed to a straw poll like we talked about the structure? I might like to have that. But the reality of it is caucus is about 99% about local elections, not just about the presidency. Our pre-registrations are doing great at this point.
On the Democratic side, are you jealous of this, open-ended idea?
Well, no, I'm not necessarily jealous. I think that caucus is actually exciting. The idea of doing a straw poll for our presidential nominee, I think, is a great idea. We've done it for some time in Colorado. It's entirely volunteer-driven. We have about 400 sites and 3,010 precincts around the state. We have seen a lot of excitement build up to Super Tuesday, and we're looking forward to having it happen and also be behind us.
And Colorado seems to relish that purple state status.
That's right. We're a purple state, and we're a new battleground state, which I think is really great for all Coloradans. I mean, it hasn't been very long since Colorado was at play for any presidential election, and now we're part of the at play for all the delegate count going into the nomination for Democratic Party.
So opposite of what the Republicans are dealing with, you're a superdelegate, so at the convention, you would be tied to what happens Tuesday, would you not?
No, our superdelegates are our unpledged delegates. There are 12 of us, and we actually are not bound to anyone, so we're unpledged.
But if Colorado should go with Bernie Sanders as a superdelegate, would you follow Colorado? Well,
I'm going to support whomever the nominee is, and I think that Colorado is just on the path to that nomination. So eventually, over the next couple of months, we're going to have a clear idea who that person is, and whomever that person is, I will be supporting.
I am last minute and a bit lazy at times. To be a part of the caucus, you had to decide this essentially 2 months ago.
That's right.
Does that need to change? Why not just show up and be part of the process?
Well, it's in state law. It's statutory, so it's not a party rule, and it's the same for Republican as well as it is for Democratic. You have a registration deadline, and this is something that probably will change as we move forward, just as we start to update and modernize some election laws.
Is there anything that voters should know before they head into Tuesday?
Well, I think, and I wanted to comment on something Rick and I have been talking about, that Democrats are not bound on Tuesday night either. And so I think people have that perception that what will happen in Colorado on Tuesday nights is Democrats will pick a presidential candidate and be bound to it. That's not the case either. And he and I have been talking jointly about how do we make it better? How do we make it better, whether it's a presidential primary or caucus where you have significant changes in how caucus works so people can be committed to presidential candidates that night?
Are you both open to the idea of a primary where everybody would get a part in it?
Yeah, I think we are. I think that we're open to an idea where If you want to vote for a Republican nominee, you get the Republican ballot, and you have to be a registered Republican, and the same for Democratic as well. And I think that there's plenty of incentive for people to partake in that process.
Yeah, and the whole poll process seems to be a little bit confusing. We were joking around earlier that people call up and say, well, I voted in a primary last time. We said, no, you didn't. You haven't voted in a primary in this state since 2000 for president. It's confusing. We need to get it clarified and straightened out.
Do you want an uncontested or contested convention?
Actually, I don't know. I guess I'll take it either way. I think it would be historical and interesting if it were contested. If it were uncontested, that would mean that we would have coalesced around a candidate earlier and get to the work of competing at that point.
A bit boring when you know it's going to happen.
We haven't played a role in the presidential primary in Colorado in a number of years. It rarely ever happens because usually you have a presumptive nominee real early.
And Rick, you get the last word.
I think that by the time we get to the Democratic convention, we will be clear as to who our nominee is.
Rick Palacio and Steve House, thanks for joining us today. And for anyone who needs to know where your caucus location is for Tuesday, we've got links to both the GOP and Democratic search engines at thedenverchannel.com/politicsunplugged. Stay with us. We'll be right back.